So you're going to get that awkward recording message. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm excited about what we have here, and I want to celebrate my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Waters from the University of Texas at Tyler. She'll be presenting today, Learning Through Real-Time Simulation. It's fascinating the work she's doing, which is why I invited her to join us. We actually also have Ken Spiro, who's the founder and CEO of SchoolSims. It's the software platform that we use as we go through these simulations, which you'll be able to see as we go forward. So with no further ado, actually, Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Hi, Forrest. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to share the kind of just sort of a multifaceted view of simulation, and I am going to share some practical aspects of just the why behind simulation, and then also look at it from a pedagogical standpoint of how I use it in my classes and provide some insight for you all there for us to dialogue around. And then I will also share about the connection of how I utilize simulation, virtual simulation specifically, as a tool to drive leadership learning. And that is what I study, one of the areas I study for my research. So I am excited to have Ken here with us from SchoolSims, and you will actually, at the end of the presentation portion, I'm going to kind of buzz through the presentation part, and then of course leave time for us to talk around that, but then provide an opportunity for you to engage in a school sim. And everybody's favorite topic of the teacher who does not play nice in the sandbox. And so we are going to engage on that one. And Ken is here, and because for multiple reasons, he is become a good friend and colleague. And over the past 3 years, I have to tell this little anecdote, Ken, you'll have to forgive me, but he put out, I was first year, faculty. I was at UT Arlington at that time. I came over to UT Tyler last year, but my first 2 years was at UT Arlington. And so, it's midnight. I'm looking through, laying in bed, scrolling my email, and I read the Division A newsletter that came out from AERA, and I'm scrolling through that, and at the very tiny bottom was a little notice from SchoolSims and Ken's contact information about looking for researchers who are interested in leadership learning and specifically around simulation. And this was an idea that I had been kicking around because as a new faculty member, I had, really pondered with my students. I taught in the PhD program and then the MED for principal prep at UT Arlington at that time. And I was really pondering on questions students were asking me, like, how did you learn that as a principal? How did you get this experience? Because we just don't even know how to, engage in that experience. And so it got me thinking, and that I had already been kind of contemplating around simulation, but I just didn't really know what was out there. And so that was what led me kind of down my little rabbit hole in contacting Ken, and we connected. And I definitely didn't know what I didn't know, and I'm still learning. But that was our first conversation. He weathered through that with me, and so we ended up connecting. And Forrest and I, actually, Dr. Kaiser and I have started a pilot study during that next year over utilizing simulation, specifically looking at an equity lens of supporting our aspiring school leaders in learning, and thinking about building capacity and building schemata for them in improving their outcomes. And so we've just kind of continued on from there. And Dr. Stout is here with us, I see, and we are replicating that pilot study right now at Southeastern Oklahoma and with their group of students there. And so Dr. Stout and Dr. Morrison have also joined our little party here in examining that. So anyway, that's just kind of some context. And I am going to jump in with starting talking about and I don't know why my thing will not turn. There we go. Okay. So what I want us to do to start off with is just to connect around talking about leadership learning. And so I have a poll everywhere. I'll jump over there to that, but really we're a small enough group that I think we can just discuss, and that'll save us some time and not jumping back and forth. But so you can feel free to put it in the chat, or we can just turn our mics off and have an open dialogue for a few minutes about this. But I want you to think about what challenges do students or aspiring leaders encounter when it comes to leadership preparation. We all teach this, but what is an area that, or areas that you see students struggle with, whether it's a conceptual idea or just the self-efficacy aspect of attacking certain dynamics of the school leadership dynamic. Just share with me what your thoughts are about that, what challenges you see that students have. We're all being crickets.
Well, I would add that I'm part of the other stuff we're doing, Jennifer, but I don't mind kicking it off. I mean, school leadership, one of the main things that we hear about is time management and understanding how to manage their time effectively while being an instructional leader. And then the differences between instructional leadership and being an admin, like it's two different things as well. So I would say that's one of them.
Okay, good. Other thoughts that other people have that you see that students struggle with?
I think, we get a lot of feedback even in TCPEA, when we've had superintendent panels of saying, hey, like when recent graduates come in, what's the biggest issue that they see? Of course, it's that reality of the job, right? We try and give them as much information as we can about what it means to be behind that administrator desk, but there's really no, replacement for actual experience. And they want people that are, experienced, but that's kind of that a double-edged sword. We need to get them certified, we need to get them prepared, but they need to also have some opportunity to learn what the job means in the real world setting.
Good.
And in addition to that, talking about balancing the job with real life. So self-care, particularly after the pandemic, and just making sure that folks are taking care of themselves, while on the job as well.
Perfect. All right. How about we have one more?
Jennifer, did you see the chat? Lizette, do you want to go ahead and talk about yours?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I was thinking about in terms of the challenges that our students encounter is that usually we see mentorship provided by those mentors in their practicum. But besides that, there's just not a lot of varied ways to support mentorship and tap into our large network of leaders. And so I find that maybe this might be an opportunity to kind of open up that mentorship platform and providing more diverse mentorship opportunities to our students, particularly in online programs.
Good. Thank you so much, Lizette. And I'm so glad you talked about that, because that's one thing that when I was talking about, my ponderings that led me down this rabbit hole that, started really with research, but then really became part of my approach as an instructor as well, more deeply, is the practicum experience. We are kind of at the mercy of what they are provided at their site for practicum. And, we can't control what that mentor does or what goes on at that site. And so that immediately creates some disparity in what different students receive. When we look at that practicum experience, and it's valuable, but we're, again, every student, depending on their site and their mentor differentiation, is going to receive different experiences. So simulation also provides almost, the opportunity to level the playing field, so to speak, when we are providing students with meaningful experiences. And so that was one of my areas that I also thought about. So I love that you mentioned that. All right. So moving on. So talking about, one thing that I always look at with my students, and talking first from the practical side before we get into the research side, is just moving from theory to practice. And so, Lizette, like what you just mentioned about the mentorship piece, how does that actually look in real life? And what you all mentioned, how do we replace actual experience? How do we balance self-care? How do you actually do that? We can read about it all day long, but actually moving from balancing all the balls to, doing it is a different thing. The time management, what does instructional leadership look like versus organizational leadership? So looking at what the research says is, we know that currently our school leaders are leaving the field at historic rates, and that leadership attrition actually exceeds teacher attrition nationally. We're sitting at about 18% nationally on leadership attrition versus about 15% for teacher attrition. And the other grim number that goes along with that is looking at kind of the lifespan, so to speak, of a school leader is an average of 3 to 5 years. So Felix, I believe it was you that mentioned about the self-care piece and balancing, work-life balance. That burnout is very real. But looking at all the factors that lead to burnout, the question is the why behind that, and helping making sure that we're assisting in that pipeline to improve those outcomes for our leaders. And so one of the leading reasons that school leaders cite leaving the field is actually a lack of meaningful professional learning. And so this is where my inquiries particularly comes into play. And so, looking at bridging the gap from theory to practice, I have a few questions, and these are just, rhetorical questions. I don't expect an answer for this, but just to kind of plant the seed for everyone before we move forward, and looking at different types of simulation that we can engage our students around. And so first is, how can we give students experience in a meaningful, authentic manner, which of course ties to all the items that you all just shared. Second is, how can we help students gain conceptual clarity around the multifaceted demands of school leadership? Again, resonating what you all shared. And finally, how can we equip students with the metacognitive skills and leadership habits that will facilitate their growth and sustainability as a leader? And this is very much what my inquiry is centered around. I do specifically look at cognitive load as well, because we all know as former school leaders that when you are stressed, when you're in real time, you're in a risk-taking environment, that efficacy, really lowers a lot of times when you look at taking risks or doing things differently. And then also just having the time and the intentionality around reflection to grow from, that schemata that we're building and make connections is a really complicated process. And so, when we're working 16-hour days, some days, and then we come home and we're exhausted, the time to really reflect and engage in the deep learning to then build that schemata for the next time we deal with a difficult situation, or we tackle how to manage our time differently, or look at how can I do differently and grow as a leader to serve my team better, that usually often, unfortunately, falls by the wayside. So specifically looking at, I'm going to talk about this first, like I said, from the practical standpoint of how I utilize simulation. And I know many of you are talking about, Lizette, that you are engaging with school sims as well, which is very exciting. And we look forward to talking more about that as we continue in the session. And then Maria, you also mentioned that as well about working with a local college in Dallas. So what I do from a pedagogical standpoint with my students, in all of my classes, I lean into all three forms of simulation. I explain to my students that I really want to engage them around moving from theory to practice in a meaningful way. And so I do that by putting them in the driver's seat. Every module that we have has a simulation, varied types of simulation within it. So I shift between these three types. And I'm going to give examples for each of these. And then, of course, we're here to also really dive into the opportunities around virtual simulation, specifically that School Sims offers. And so first we have role playing. And this is where I utilize just, your basic scenarios. Forrest and I were talking about prior to everyone joining today that I offer typically, I do this in class where they can have a scenario. I do a virtual learning community structure for my discussion boards. And I'm very strategic in how I put them in groups. I survey them, I get to know them before I put them into their discussion board groups or their virtual learning community. And that way they can play off of each other's strengths and challenges and where they have aspirations, because we know some people want to be at district office. They're not interested in campus leadership, and then some people have their eye on the campus leadership focus. So I am strategic about that first, and that I feel like that's a big contributor to the outcomes for how they engage around this space. And so role playing is simply, like when we have scenarios and putting them in that driver's seat and, okay, what would you do in this case? And talking through that. I also offer extended workshop opportunities for my students. That is optional. I do typically have about 50 to 70% attendance, which is really exciting because, when do we ask for extra learning or come to extra optional things? A lot of times when we're a grad student and drinking from a fire hydrant. But students really lean into these opportunities to get to do these different things in practice, having some replacement, experience, so to speak, and supplement what they're getting also with their practicum. And so that is with role playing. And then in basket activities, I build these into the modules as well. And so I will give a very specific example of what that looks like in the next slide. And then I will also provide a very specific example of the virtual or digital simulation, specifically using School Sims, and what that looks like as well. And then, of course, we will engage in one here in a few minutes, and I will provide the forum for when I do a synchronous session. I will model that also with you all. And so for a sample in basket, a performance task basically that I have students do. So this is just kind of a brief overview. If you are interested in this, please reach out to me and I will be happy to share my documents with you and give you kind of the, I guess, really sort of the lesson or the unit plan structure. But like I said, within each module, they are either doing a role playing, they are doing an in-basket, or they are doing a virtual simulation. And my modules are set up in either 2-week or 3-week structures. And the 3-week structures are for this one specifically for the in-basket, because I am asking them to go back to their campus and take their learning that we have in class and actually apply it to a small group dynamic within their campus. So this example is curriculum and instruction for school improvement, one of the courses that I teach. And so specifically within this 3-week unit, what happens is students engage first in learning through a lecture series that I do for them. And then selections from the book of Starting a Movement, Building Culture from the Inside Out in Professional Learning Communities. And that is by Williams and Herc. If you're interested in that, I can share that with you as well. But so the students read first. That's how I set up the module. The first week is for reading, so they can gain the theoretical understanding of where we're headed. And then from there, they engage in a learning community discussion to unpack their learning. So I have some very specific focus areas that they talk about together, and that way they can start bridging that gap from, you know, kind of an abstract understanding of what does that look like into, okay, how do y'all do that on your campus? What does this make, how do you make sense in your mind for this? Before to then transition and prepare them to go to their campus and engage a team on what I'm asking them to do with the simulation. So specifically in this module, because I give them a different text for each module, I give them excerpts from text. I don't do, to me, there's no, this is just me speaking, my personal opinion. There's not a holy grail text, so to speak, on curriculum instruction for school improvement. So I pull from multiple resources to provide them that framework. But this one in particular is this text that I mentioned. So the focus is on doing a PLC analysis. And so I give them a rubric. It is aligned to the text, so they have some familiarity with what they're doing, and then also building off their prior knowledge that they have built with their learning community. And then again, like I said, they engage a team on their campus. I asked them specifically in this basket to collect a group of EF Huttons, which is also identified in the text and defined for them. But basically an EF Hutton is someone who's a mover and a shaker. They're not necessarily a yes person. They may be, you know, ask critical questions, but they are highly respected on the campus. And so I asked them to pull together of a team about 4 to 5 people. It's their choice about how they approach it, because I want to meet the needs of, you know, their diverse needs on their campuses. And then they select who they want to pull. And so some students lean into it with a cross-curricular approach. Some students lean into it with a cross-grade level approach. And a lot of students also go make sure that they include somebody from fine arts, athletics, you know, just so they can also get a different perspective, specials for those who are in elementary setting, to see different lenses based upon their PLC analysis. Again, if you're interested, I won't get into the weeds of what the analysis entails, but if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share the documentation with you. So what happens in putting the student in the driver's seat is the student actually takes the leader role in guiding his or her selected team through the analysis. And then I also ask the student to develop individual guiding questions for discussion and inquiry on responsive action. Ultimately, in this class, their end game is they are developing an improvement plan, an action plan. And so that is where they're kind of headed and picking up pieces to get there. So this facilitates that learning as well. And then finally, for the reflection piece is that the student engages in reflection to explore, you know, their leadership skills, their takeaways, their trade-offs, tools, for future, you know, toolkit items that they need, and then implications for future leadership actions. And this mirrors the same process that I do with virtual simulation, which is what I am going to move into talking about next. So virtual simulation, and Ken, I'm going to kick it over to you and let you elaborate on this as well, specifically like within school sims and what it offers students, especially around the things that our colleagues mentioned when y'all shared about what students are challenged with. But first, why utilizing virtual or digital simulation? It does place student in the driver's seat through a choose your own adventure format. And I'm specifically talking about school sims, and because that is the simulation software that we use at UT Tyler. And I have used it, like I said, for the past 3 years, also in a research format. But simulation provides experience through a risk-free environment. And so when we want to lower that cognitive distress piece. That is really a key player for this, to give them meaningful schemata as they build, and then think about how to approach future incidents that may look similar. Obviously there's not going to be a one size fits all, but we're working on building that blueprint for them, the mental blueprint of how to tackle situations in the future as a leader and give them that experience. The second reason is that simulations represent real life challenges that school leaders face. And I will just say, personal note, I have been through the whole library in school sims, and Ken can talk a little bit more about what the library offers, but it is, there's so many approaches to looking at a very wide variety of real life challenges that school leaders face. The other thing I love about the simulations and my students also love this, is they are multifaceted. It's not one-dimensional or two-dimensional. They are very much engaging in, when we have to juggle a lot of balls at one time, there's other things that come into play. So you could be dealing with a teacher in your office and having a conversation, and the phone rings, and it's the superintendent who wants something and, needs you to do something. And so it's very realistic in that aspect. And that's something that students, I have received a lot of feedback from the pedagogical standpoint, but then also the research standpoint, that students are like, I never knew you had to balance that many different things at one time and just constantly pivot. So that has been some really valuable feedback from them on that, and adding to their toolkits. But students do explore trade-offs and consequences from their decisions, and that play out over a given time period. That's also a big ticket item for me in looking at school sims, is each one has a different timeline. But what I called it in my very, again, my musings and my inquiry mind of thinking about simulation before I actually got deeply involved in this, is the aspect of understanding, again, we're not in a one-dimensional or two-dimensional space, and that I called it almost like a gateway decision making. And that we have this decision, it opens up, and then three other things happened as a result of that. And then what are the implications about those three things? And then those spin off into more things. And that's something that students I have seen really struggle with, because they think, oh, I made the decision, it kind of ended, I don't have to continue with that. And they can't foresee how it can play out over months, and how it can come back to them even, 2 or 3 months down the road. And so the simulations definitely provide that frame of reference and that space for them to explore that. And then finally, the students can engage synchronously or asynchronously. And so today we'll do a synchronous version and how I facilitate those. And then they can also engage asynchronously. So when my students do these in the modules, when they have their unit, they are doing them asynchronously. When I have them in a workshop model, we do them synchronously together. And they love the discussion around it. But they also benefit just as greatly doing it asynchronously as well, based upon their feedback. And so the sims also have reflections that are built in throughout, kind of some open-ended responses where they can stop and really engage in their thinking. And then at the end, it does provide a report for them to help them understand their decision-making pathways, and then implications and considerations or trade-offs for the future as they, again, may approach, a situation similar as a school leader. So, Ken, other things you want to add?
Well, you did a great job. Thank you. Really what this is really built around is just distinguishing between how students learn from instruction versus how we learn from experience. When it comes to instruction, right, no matter how nicely you design it, it really is all about conveying information on the one hand, and about best practices, right? We need people to know the right way of it. That's what we teach, the frameworks, the processes to follow. But the thing is about experience is that that's not how we learn, right? We don't learn from best practices in experience. We actually learn from getting it wrong. We learn from making mistakes. And so if we're going to blend, if we're going to have a blended learning where we're blending both the instructional elements and the experience opportunities, because we do know that experience is the best teacher, then we do need to allow for mistakes, and in fact, even possibly to encourage that. And so to create that environment inside of which students can safely make mistakes, as was expressed earlier, but also equally importantly, that they get to deal with what happens after, right? There's always consequences, there's always blowback. And it's not just, we're never going to be perfect, right? Students, administrators, teachers, we're never going to get it right, certainly not according to everybody. So the question is, are we prepared to deal with what happens after? And so giving that opportunity to deal with the after, because there's no such thing as a one and done. And then lastly, to have that opportunity for reflection. This modality, the technology allows us to be able to deliver on that message so that it is a nice complement to the other methods that are really more, in my mind, instructional, right? Because our common practice from a student's perspective is in a role play to want to do it right, because they want to do what they think is right or what they think you think is right, but not necessarily what they would do. And that's what we want to get at with this as well. And so glad to see that it's being appreciated. Right, just so you know, there is a library on the leadership side of over 40 simulations, each one dealing with different types of schools, different types of districts, different levels of leadership, but problems of practice that manifest in the school setting, all inspired by actual experiences that have happened in the field across the country.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ken. Does anybody have any questions at this point before I move to talk about actually what we do with this? Okay, and feel free to interrupt me as we go. And I do have some time built in for questions as well if you have something. So again, like I said, parallel structure to what I talked about with the in-basket activity, how I actually build the virtual sim into a performance task for my students in the coursework. So again, asynchronous, 100% online programming is what we offer at UT Tyler. I also did the same at UT Arlington in our principal preparation program. So that has been my experience as an instructor in that frame of reference. So I know many of you also have the same structure. So what I do specifically when I have students 2 semesters in a row, just to give you some context. So they take curriculum and instruction for school improvement with me. And then following that, the next semester, they take leadership theory and practice with me. And in the first semester in curriculum and instruction for school improvement, I do workshops with them to do a synchronous like I said, I do the workshop, the synchronous connection for them that's optional and many attend, but they do not engage in their first asynchronous sim until a little bit later in the course. So all of their sims at this point have been, up to this point have either been role playing or they have been in basket activities. And I do that strategically and intentionally because I want them to build, some understanding around the frame of reference of working with stakeholders. And so like I described before in the other performance tasks, that's an example of that and how I do that. And that way they do have some frame of reference before they approach the asynchronous version, because they are on their own. And if they do come to the optional piece with the synchronous, I'm there with them, we're facilitating, we're talking, it's a little bit lower stress for them. And so because they do, like Ken mentioned, students oftentimes, and we're all guilty of this, I believe, as educators, is we're a little bit task driven. We want our gold stars. We want to do it well. And so that has been what I have seen with students is the first time that they engage asynchronously in a sim, they are wanting to make the best right answer. And that is not at all what it's about, like Ken just said. So I do expose them to these other pieces and build capacity in them before we get to this, like I said, intentionally. And then when we get into 5310 for leadership practice, theory and practice, I have more embedded because they have kind of seen the method to my madness is what I lovingly call it, with them understanding the moving from theory to practice component. And so this is, like I said, the first sim. I do include a video prior to their engagement in the sim just to situate them in the environment and preload, navigating that decision making and self-reflection. And of course, to talk to them about it's not about perfection. And so they understand that and can situate themselves in that space. And then second, the student participates in the virtual simulation. So the one that I use specifically in this class is equity-centered leadership, and they explore the impact and influence contributing to disparities in performance for students of color on their campus. And so here there's a wide variety of that, gateway decision making, like I was talking about. They have a group of teachers who do a lot of the blame game, students aren't working hard enough, it's the parents' fault. There's a lot of a lack of accountability on the campus. The change that, people just don't get excited about engaging in. And so they deal with a lot of moving parts and thinking about listening. They listen to the student voices, they listen to the teacher voices, they're looking at their data. So the sim is very three-dimensional for them in exploring, how do I actually change the culture of accountability for my faculty, but then how do I also improve my student outcomes at a rapid pace, because this is, not acceptable. So then third, they again engage in every simulation that we do, regardless of the type. We engage in a targeted reflection, same thing, parallel structure to the previous, but it's a little bit different for this performance task because here I do give them a choice for their reflection because of the asynchronous aspect. And then I want to give them the space to, explore and unpack their reflection and their learning. And so I let them choose. They can do a presentation structure, really simple presentation structure, or they can do a Q&A exploration that they just video themselves. And it's funny because so many of my students, like their eye twitches a little bit and they get stressed out because I make them video themselves quite a bit when they reflect. But most of them choose to do the videoed reflection on this one. And because they've leaned into that more, and they've also seen the reflection as a leadership skill that they need to develop further. And that's also a lot of times what they talk about in the reflection. So it's just an interesting tidbit that, they don't like the videoing, but then they decide to video themselves when it comes to that. So to kind of wrap up on just the connection pieces for me before we jump over into engaging in the sim together is, like I mentioned, I do utilize the virtual simulation, specifically school sims, for my research. And so what I look at in this strand of my research is the influence of simulation as a leadership learning tool in relation to, like I said, self-efficacy. And I also look at cognitive load. And so if you're interested in that, I will be happy to send you some things and share with you. I don't have time to get in the weeds of, unpacking all the pieces with this, especially with the cognitive load. But just to share with you what I have found, or we have found really as a team, is that we do see a positive impact and growth in self-efficacy for our students. And like I said, all the studies that I have done thus far have been with students who are in principal preparation programs, and they're all at different points in their program. Some studies have included students who are in their first semester. Some studies have included students who are anywhere in their program, and then some students are currently in their practicum or internship in their last semester before graduation. And then when it comes to cognitive load, looking at intrinsic, extraneous, and germane loads that we have seen with the school sims, because that was one thing that I am really passionate about in looking at leadership learning as my research agenda, because we go back to why school leaders are leaving. And one of the reasons is because of lack of meaningful professional learning. So when we unpack that further and think about meaningful, okay, what is that? And go a little bit deeper with that. And then we think about the nuances of being a school leader and just everything that's thrown at you all the time. You know, our cognitive load, like I said, when we look at these three areas, the triangulation of what goes into cognitive load and how we build schemata and how we feel effective and how we lower that affective filter where we're not stressed out all the time, because we don't learn when we're stressed out. And the job in itself is, to me, being a school principal is the best job in the world. And now I get to prepare people for the best job in the world. But I do think that, you know, we have an inability sometimes to process things and build that blueprint, that mental blueprint we need, because of the stress level that we have in school leadership, which is also another reason why people leave the field. And so this is why I specifically wanted to study cognitive load, because this was missing in the literature. I did not see anywhere where we were looking specifically at testing cognitive load in simulations. You know, it was just, simulation is great, we need to use it. And it's kind of like AI, you know, that's a question that I've asked recently, is like, well, everybody says we need to use AI in education because it makes things more efficient for us. How do you quantify efficiency? How do you qualify efficiency? And so that's the same way that I wanted to come back to cognitive load and actually quantify that based upon student responses, and then qualify it as well through a mixed method version, you know, of pulling student voices forward. So we have found school sims that the cognitive load is balanced, it's effective, and it does provide meaningful schemata building for students. And so, like I said, I can share more with you on that, on our findings, if you're interested in that. And then we will also be writing a paper soon on some of these study findings that we've had. But it's a positive and great thing and exciting to see that. But I'm looking forward to continuing to collect this data, you know, as we move forward to find out more about that. So here was just a sample student comments from a focus group that I had, and just to give everybody a little bit of context. And these students were one after the other. So they were in a focus group and they were just, you know, bouncing off of each other and what they were talking about. So I pulled this example specifically for that reason. But, well, it would help if I didn't move. But the student said, I did try to think through my choices before I made them. So for me, what the simulation did was help me to realize you're never going to make everyone happy. And it allowed me to see what I don't see being a principal, if that makes sense, because there were things that I didn't think of at the end of the day. The simulation was just like it is in real life. No, you're not going to be able to make everyone happy, but you have to do the best that you can when you make a choice, and then just stand behind your decision. I wish there was more training like that, because I never even thought about that. Like, you will be having to work with stakeholders and make decisions for everybody, just like in the superintendent situation. So they're referencing that there was a superintendent calling them and asking question in their simulation is what it was about. But the other one, she just continues on with that. And for sake of time, I know you all can read that, but she just elaborated further about thinking about the multifaceted dimension of decision making, and obviously that we don't see how decisions impact those in front of us. There are plenty of, you know, waves that continue moving and we don't always see them, how the decisions impact others. And so she elaborated on that as well. And So we are going to jump into the sim, but before we do that, and I'm going to switch over while I'm doing that, if anybody has any questions at this point or would like to talk or explore anything, then I want to open the floor up for that while I switch over to our simulation and our poll everywhere activity.
Jennifer, I did have a question since we are a brand new program. We're in our first cohort in our Masters of Educational Leadership. And so I had been hearing about the Sims when I was thinking about prepping for a new course coming up, and we received grant funds to help us with that idea of mentorship. And so that's what led us on our school Sims journey. But I noticed that you mentioned just the use of the asynchronous sort of ability to use the Sims, but also you do them synchronously. And I wondered how many within a course do you usually put those different simulations? Do you feel like there's a point where there's too many to place in a course, and like what that number might be? So we're starting to explore, and we're in an onboarding meeting tomorrow. And so I'll start to kind of figure out how robust they are and how much time we have, but just getting your insight would be helpful in the number that you usually place in a course.
Sure. So you're talking about the school Sims, right? The virtual.
Yes.
Okay. The asynchronous ones in 5349, that first course that I was talking, the course I've given you examples on, I only do one asynchronous there. I do offer 2 workshop sessions for them to do synchronous. And like I said, those are optional, but I do have pretty high attendance that typically come to them, and they get really excited about it. And so they look forward to the asynchronous part. But after they do the asynchronous in that class, there's only one built into the class, just because I'm also, like I said, scaffolding them to, because my style is different, and how I approach the way I teach, and trying to give them as many multifaceted experiences as possible. So I only do one in that course, but I do have several, usually about 60% of my students email me and want more that they can do on their own. And so I have a list that I send them, and I'll be happy to share that with you too. I've kind of done a course mapping for them, and I know your course structures and course maps are different from ours, but I'll be happy to share that with you if you want to email me. In 5310 for leadership practice and theory, I do 2 to 3 and I shift. It just depends on student needs. Minimum, I do 2 asynchronous. Maximum, I do 3. So I differentiate my courses every semester. I have my basic structure, but then I also differentiate and modify based upon feedback and what I'm getting from students, because I do ongoing feedback from them each module, if that makes sense. So that's basically what I do, if that helps.
Yes, that's very helpful. I also appreciate how you build theory or to help scaffold them in. And so that insight you provided was tremendously helpful. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm looking forward to connecting with you and hearing about how it goes with the school Sims, because
Thank you.
your students will really like it. So we have in this simulation, we have Kim Capana, and she is a 6th grade teacher. And then, so it starts off with just introducing you to who everybody is. And then our next actor, we have Diana Walsh, and she's the 6th grade teacher who co-teaches with Kim. And so I already explained to you or mentioned that we have a teacher who does not play nicely in the sandbox with others. And so if you can, and kind of infer here who that person may be, you may have already figured that out. We have Brian Beck, who is a 6th grade teacher and is also on the team. And then we have Christy Lopez, who is a special education teacher. And then the sim, it always gives you this overview before you start. And just to let you know, encourage you to play multiple times. This is a safe environment, all the things that we've already talked about.
In this scenario, you're the principal of Brookside Elementary School. At Brookside, the less experienced faculty members tend to be special educators, and there's a divide between the veterans and the new faculty. You were concerned about the progress of students with diverse learning needs, so during your first 2 years at the school, you successfully established collaborative groups amongst the teachers with the intention of increasing student achievement. You've also initiated a co-teaching model where special education and regular education teachers are teaming in classrooms. Though still in the early stages, the collaborative groups have developed norms such as treat colleagues respectfully, make positive presumptions, notice your impact on others, and so on. Establishing norms seems to have helped the school climate, but more effort is needed. You're concerned that the staff still does not always treat one another in a professional manner. Your goal is to create a more positive tone in the school.
Okay, so there's our synopsis.
It is now late spring, and state test results indicate students in disaggregated groups are failing to make adequate progress. One of your go-to teachers, Kim Capania, a special education teacher, is assigned to co-teach with a 6th grade teacher, Diana Walsh, who is particularly unpleasant. Kim is a teacher leader who seems well-grounded, highly professional, and someone who gets it. Moments before she is scheduled to facilitate the 6th grade collaborative team meeting, she asks to speak with you and then arrives in your office.
Thank you for meeting with me. I'm sorry I am so upset, but I've been trying to decide if I should even come to you about this. Now I think I've waited too long, but you must know, Diana is very tough on the kids. She has her favorites, but with some kids, she has such an attitude. She's sarcastic and she calls them lazy, and she's making some of them really shut down. I do all I can to build the kids up, but we're supposed to be teaming in her classroom. She's making that impossibly hard. On top of that, she's just so rude to some kids and to me.
Okay, so Kim has told us about.
How will you respond to Kim's concerns? Make a choice from the following. 1.
Okay, I'm gonna turn the voice off, but so here when you get into this, you can expand your options to give a little bit more information. And I know we are running close to time, so I just want to move us through a little bit quicker so you can see that. But what I do in a synchronous setting, so when students are doing this asynchronously, obviously they just make their selection, hit next, and then they have now started their adventure, so to speak. And because this is a choose your own adventure structure. But when I am synchronous, what I do with them is, and this is actually a question that I ask them when we do this one synchronously, because this is one that I do as a synchronous with my students, but we did that one together. So I usually start them with this of what words come to mind when thinking about dealing with a difficult or unprofessional teacher. So that's something I do just as kind of a brain starter, get them going and thinking before we jump into the simulation, because obviously I have told them that it's about an unprofessional teacher. So we're not going to use that one. But what I do here for the synchronous is I set them up to where they can now make a decision based upon the decision factors, and then they vote. Because if I spend time letting them all answer or talk it out, then we would be doing this for a couple of hours. Whereas a sim usually is anywhere from about 30 to 45 minutes, depending on, again, your own work style and how quickly you work through it. But that's something that this is what I do with them. So if you look at these choices, we have choice 1, choice 2, choice 3, and choice 4. That would be obviously what I do to then let them vote and then make a decision here. And then we go with a group decision and then move on. So some people may not agree, but we do the consensus when we're doing it as a whole group. So I'm going to let you read these. And so how will you respond to Kim's concerns? And then I want you to vote. So if you have your phone handy, or obviously everybody has their computer, then you can do that. But just get in your mind which one you want to vote, because I have to toggle between these two. And so first is in your response to Kim. Thanks so much for opening up about your concerns, Kim. What are your perceptions about what is going on? So you would want to make time to listen to all her concerns. Option 2, I've seen some of the same issues with Diana. I'm glad you felt comfortable coming forward. Tell me more about what you've been seeing. You want to affirm Kim's perspective and her choice to share with you. And then the third option, Kim, you need to understand that she is trying to motivate kids that are falling through the cracks. Some of those kids just need the kind of tough love she is delivering. Kim may need to toughen up and see this from Diana's perspective. Or your fourth option, I hear your concerns. The problem is that if it is just you, it is a he said, she said situation. I haven't heard from others who share your concerns. Affirm Kim's perspective, but let her know what you need to hear concerns from, but let her know you need to hear concerns from more than one source. Sorry, I can't read today. So get in your head which one you would choose. And I'm making you think fast on your feet, and then your vote is here. So you can use the QR code if you have your phone, or if you want to join by web, and then you can make your decision here for decision 1, 2, 3, or 4. All right, an answer come in. Give us about 15 more seconds for more votes to make our decision. Okay, so we have choice 1, and then we will hit submit.
Well, I'm here now, so I may as well just get it all out. I know a lot of kids really like her, but I think she is so demeaning. She gives me such nasty looks sometimes, and she'll stare at me, so I feel she's undermining what I'm trying to get done in class. Sometimes she won't even give me a table or a place to work with the kids. She treats me like I'm not a professional, like I'm not a teacher. I've seen her treat other staff that way too. She needs to be more respectful. Anyway, I'm sure I've taken too much of your time, and I know we both have to get to my team's collaborative meeting. I didn't mean to dump this on you, but I just didn't know what else to do.
Okay, so Kim is very
How
distracted.
will you react to Kim's thoughts? Make a choice from the following. 1, Kim, this is really troubling. Your work is so important, and I'm concerned.
Okay, so here we don't have time to go down the rabbit hole or our adventure hole, but so again, you would choose that. And so say, we just choose A arbitrarily, and then she continues
was it.
talking.
During this conversation with Kim, you reflect on your own difficulty.
And so, of course, you continue on. And so on this, the other thing I wanted you to see with the synchronous, this is what I do. Asynchronous, obviously, we don't have this component. They are just working one-on-one within the sim. But I continue this way. We will stop and have discussion, especially when it's 50-50. And then I'll usually open it up for about 1 or 2 minutes discussion. And then I give them the option if they want to change their decision. I do not do sage on the stage. A lot of times students look to me to, well, Dr. Waters, what would you do? It's not about me, it's about you and your learning. And so from there, I facilitate it in that way. And then at the very end, I will give them in the synchronous piece, because I'm not making them do a written or a video reflection. So then we will do this and unpack their reflection at the end. And so just what is a leadership lesson you learned from the scenario that can assist you? And so again, they just share out and through the poll everywhere. So I can, lower the affective filter for them there, and they feel more open to share. And then the last question, what leadership knowledge or skill did you feel you may have lacked in making these decisions? And then what do you still need to learn to be equipped in a situation like this? And so that is how I facilitate those things when I do it synchronously. And then obviously I already shared the dynamic of how I get them to reflect in multiple ways when we do it asynchronously and use it actually as a product for learning within the course. So that is it. Any questions that anybody has? I know we're at the top of the hour, and of course questions for Ken too, or anything Ken may want to add.
Have to use the good teacher wait time, right? Well, Toad, if there are no other questions, I do want to thank you, Dr. Waters, Mr. Spiro. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for this informative talk. It's great work and just very important for what, our students need. So thank you both for joining us. I want to give one more chance if there are any other questions that people have thought of before we move on. But other than that, again, thank you again, and we'll close on our session. But any other questions before we call it on this one? Okay, I guess not. Actually, that was great. I mean, again, very informative, very clear, and just a wonderful presentation as well. So thank you all for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Forrest, if we can stop recording, but if anybody wants to stay after for a few minutes and ask any questions, then
Sure.
I'll be happy to stay.
Great. Let me go ahead and do that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.